Hello, and welcome back to the Dial Virtual Global Summit. My name's Simon Enright, and you're joining us to discuss diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, and culture's role in crisis management, speaking up and taking action. So from COVID pandemics to Black Lives Matter, it's become really important for leaders to step forward at times like this to confront society's challenges. So we're going to be discussing some of the things that you might need to help with the communicating effectively during those crises. When you communicate internally, when you communicate externally, how do you have concrete, or what's the value of having concrete investment in diverse and inclusive crisis communications? How can you measure the real impact of those plans? What's the risk of staying silent? How do you put together a risk mitigation plan? What does it look like? What do you need in it? Luckily, we have three people who are going to help us guide through this. We have Jenny Hall, Margot Slattery, and Ian Toll, who are going to introduce themselves and give us a little bit of an explanation of their role in diversity and inclusion in their organisations. Jenny, do you want to go first?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much, Simon. Really looking forward to the panel as well. So my name is Jenny Hall. I'm the Director of Corporate Affairs at Royal Mail. So in my role, I'm responsible for internal communications, external communications, public affairs, and also our ESG agenda, working incredibly closely with all of my diversity and inclusion colleagues in HR as well. So look, really passionate about this topic and really looking forward to the debate today.
Margot, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure, Simon. Hi, everybody. I'm Margot Slattery, and I work for ISS Group, based out of Denmark, but you can probably tell from the accent I'm Irish, and I'm responsible for our diversity, inclusion and belonging and social impact. That's really the S part of the ESG, and reporting to group and working with a host of colleagues all around the world on that. And very nice to join you today.
And Ian, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Ian. I'm a 38-year veteran in the food industry. I'm literally very fortunate to have worked in global manufacturing, in food manufacturing, in food retail, in restaurants. I'm very fortunate to have lived in 4 countries and worked in 12. So I have a very interesting take on diversity and ESG from different parts of the world that I've been in.
So look, let's dive in, and colleagues, please join in on any of the questions. But I was going to go first with Jenny, by virtue of her alphabetical prominence from her surname. Hallbit, Slattery, and Toll, I think, is the agreement we made beforehand. Jenny, what are the benefits of diversity and inclusion being a key part of any of your crisis communications?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I sort of think about this in a couple of different ways. Firstly, I think that by having a more kind of diverse approach to things, making sure that you've got a very inclusive culture, A, you're probably more likely to avoid a crisis in the first place. And B, I think you'll be in a stronger position to deal with it as well. And kind of, I suppose, starting with the first point, what do most crises come about because of? They come about because of poor decision making, sweeping issues under the carpet, people not having a voice, a lack of different perspectives around the organisation, and sometimes also a lack of curiosity from the board, from management as well, around issues that really probably should have been managed earlier. And we've seen lots of different high-profile examples of that. If you are building the type of inclusive culture that brings all of those perspectives in, make sure that people can feel that they speak up, then actually I think you can avoid a crisis in the first place. And then secondly, I think you are in a much stronger position to deal with those crises much more effectively and much more quickly. I think there is a natural human tendency that when you're in a crisis situation, you need to move at speed. Our default kind of human position often is to just gravitate towards the people that are most similar to us, because they've probably got, we feel that we might be able to make decisions a bit quicker. We feel like everybody gets what we're trying to do. And actually, I think that's the worst thing that you can do. That's the worst thing that you can do in a crisis. And look, there are lots of different types of crisis, but if I give one from my experience over the last year or so. In Royal Mail last year, I should be clear, Royal Mail and Post Office separate organisations. I feel like I need to explain that.
That's a wonderful thing to make clear, Jenny.
It is.
Post the January ITV documentary.
Yes, exactly. But last year, Royal Mail had its fair share of crises as well. We're a loss-making business, and like many organisations, we've had a lot of industrial action. So we had 18 days of strike that kind of ended the previous Christmas, but it still took another 6 months to kind of get an agreement with our trade union around changes that we needed. One of the issues that we were dealing with was moving the start times of our postmen and women back later. Lots of benefits to that, which I won't go into, but environmental efficiency means we can deliver more parcels next day. It was the most challenging part of one of the most challenging parts of getting the agreement across. And that's because I think when we first started looking at it, we looked at it from a very logical perspective. It's logical. It means we can deliver more for our customers. We can reduce our emissions. We can be more efficient by just moving these times back a little bit more. And what we didn't listen to at the start enough is the individual perspectives from our employees about what that would mean for them. And one of the things, I'm the executive sponsor for women at Royal Mail. So I went out and I did a series of listening sessions and worked more about hearing the female perspective. And what you hear there from both parents and carers, and this is not all female, but there were a lot of women that were raising this, was actually moving those start times back means that the very reason why I took the job, so that I could go and pick up my kids after school at 3 o'clock and I could be there on time, was suddenly in jeopardy. And you know what? We also took a broader perspective, which I just would not have considered because it's just not part of my my perspective. Is we did other listening groups with different groups of individuals. There was also quite a strong, I really don't want to be stereotypical here, but there was quite a strong male perspective where there were issues around the later times as well, because 3 o'clock on a Saturday, not part of my weekly routine, but 3 o'clock on a Saturday, quite a lot of football games going on. Big issue for our staff. And if we hadn't taken in all of those different perspectives and found solutions for them around creating new exemptions processes, making sure that women, we actually wouldn't have got to the solution that we needed. So there's a really clear business benefit to making sure that you're taking in those direct kind of perspectives as well.
So a really kind of preemptive, stop the crisis from happening in the first place by making sure you think about the diversity of your staff and make sure they're included. Yeah. Margot, just measurable impacts, just thinking more broadly about other businesses, can you think of returns from taking that more proactive approach to diversity and inclusion when you're driving forward a kind of crisis management situation?
Yeah, I mean, Simon, I think there are many sort of ways of looking at returns as well. So, returns and measurement, it may be the fiscal return and measurement, but it's also the employee retention, the reputation of an organization, and so many, many things. I picked 3 examples when I was thinking about this. I picked 3 examples and one that I know a little bit more, but if I start at the ones I know less, as in don't know the organizations as well, but one was, for instance, Primark, which is called Pennies in my part of the world, but Primark globally. And Primark, and I think it was in 2013, there was a disaster in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, where 110 workers lost their life in the Rana Plaza disaster. Now, Primark, and I've heard some of the executives and some of the leaders in Primark speak to this. They really, they didn't do what they probably did all the things that Jenny spoke about in the beginning, but then they learned, and they took time to learn, they took time to listen, to understand, and they've turned that disaster into, for them, a learning experience. Obviously, it's still a disaster for the many people who lost their lives and for the community. But they got very involved in the ecosystem. They learned to become somebody who spoke in a very different language about their obligation, and then obviously how they use funds and philanthropy to bring for change and to work with other retailers, particularly in fashion. And as we know, fast fashion comes at a cost, and they've become better. I'm not advocating for them, and I'm not saying they get it right, but they've become better because of the learning. I spoke as well. There's another example, Carrefour. Many years ago in Brazil, there was a dreadful shooting of a black security guard by white security people in the firm, and sadly, for the person lost their lives. So it was a murder, and the bystanders that were there posted videos of this, and it went viral and went all over the world. So again, for Carrefour, rather than just sort of seeing it as paying out a compensation, which of course they did, they were also took time to learn, to listen, to understand, and took very decisive action, as in terminating the security firm, doing a whole code of conduct for training for any firms that would work with them, training for their own employees, and then learning for their senior management. And the last one that I'd speak to, and this is one that I said I knew a little bit better. So I worked previously for Sodexo Group globally. Sodexo many years ago had a class action lawsuit in the US from their African-American workers in relation to discrimination. And it actually became the foundation for Sodexo's work in diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And to be fair to the organization, they were and still are a leader in this space. And, the CEO at the time, Michelle Landell, went out, hired somebody to lead the diversity change when nobody else was doing this, and then put in a huge amount of actions and learnings. And still to this day, it resonates and is something that's talked about, and always that lesson is brought home. So I suppose I just cite those three, and there are many others where organizations had something very bad happen. They reacted and dealt with it. Very vital. So that's just three, Simon, and happy to go in more, but I may be speaking too long.
No, you're not at all, and we might come back to that. I just wonder whether we want to draw up one more issue before throwing it much more broadly open. I think both Jenny and Margot have described issues where companies have something's happened internally and internally to staff. That there feels like there's another area of communications that people are grappling with. And Ian, this is a drum roll for me asking you a question, which is a little bit like the last session where Leila was discussing the crisis in Gaza. But there are external events that happen, and as an organisation, you feel like you might need to respond. What factors do you think organisations should consider when considering the timing and the nature of their response to issues in society?
I think the first thing to say is, has there been a time in my working life when there's been so many challenges, both around the world and locally? I spent the last 8 years living in the Middle East, and I was the only middle-aged white guy in a company of many thousands of people. And I experienced possibly what diversity could be in reverse to me. And I think, having been through COVID, where so many of us got locked out of our countries and away from our families, and so many people, especially as a CEO, would actually ask us for the answers to questions. They would actually expect us to have answers to questions in these unusual times. And it's only in those times do you really focus on being willing to say, I don't know. But actually, by having a diverse environment, you can actually listen. As a CEO, half of your job is to listen to people's views. And it was also a different dynamic for me, because the environment I was in, I wasn't just employing nearly 100 nationalities of people from every race, color, religion that I can actually name, and I probably can't name them all. But I wasn't just responsible for their jobs. A lot of these people were working abroad to send money home to whole towns, villages, families, extended families. So the responsibility of that was huge. But more importantly, that was a time I think that for me, diversity was the most powerful, because I was actually forced, both by myself and by the environment I was in, to actually really listen and understand different cultures and the impacts. All these things are happening around the world, but they were happening to me, they were happening to you. We were all either locked in or locked out. I was locked out for 11 months, believe it or not. But yeah, for me, diversity has become a way of life. It's not a phrase. It's not a 3-letter acronym. By the way, I hate them and I'm really struggle with them. But for me, it's a way of life.
I haven't said DIBEC yet at this point.
I know.
It's a 5-letter acronym.
I know. I've always struggled with them.
Bless you. So Ian, I think all of you, interestingly, have said one thing up front about what is important in a communication strategy is all of you have talked about listening as opposed to communicating, which certainly from my perspective feels absolutely right. One question, the relative balance of listening internally to your own staff and externally to stakeholders, how do you balance that? Where do you go about balancing that? Margot, do you want to start with that, and then Jenny, I might come to you too.
Sure. And listen, I'm not a communications expert in any way, so I can only just talk about my lived experience, I guess. But when it's happened and I'm involved and our teams are involved and our organization is involved, I think the listening to our own teams is probably has got to even have a balance even a little bit higher, because when those teams are not listened to and their views are not at least acknowledged, I'm not saying you can get it right all the time, you can't go back and please everybody. Those teams become very vocal very quickly externally, and therefore the external stakeholders part rises up. And if you take examples, and again, I'm not attributing this to any one organization, but for instance, the Roe versus Wade situation that happened, the reversal of that year and a bit ago in the US, the murder of George Floyd, etc. I saw those many organizations, that pendulum swing within days because organizations weren't listening. So I think that the balance has got to be in favor of your own teams first. And even if you, and again, this is just my experience, but even if you don't have the answers, and if you're, as an organization, still struggling in the internal debates going on, at least respond, say something, go out to your teams and say, we're trying to pick this up in many different ways, but acknowledge. And that's where I think is best, because I also know what it's like to be in an organization. And if you feel you're not being listened to, wow, does that push your buttons?
Jenny, can I add a twist? And I hope this isn't unfair, and if it is, just pushback. So if you are in a circumstance, so you described the strikes, and in those conversations with staff, Margot's making the point that the balance probably is with staff first, because they're going to represent outwards. How much, though, of the conversation with staff are you going to be saying, think of the impact on our customers, some of whom are incredibly vulnerable, who are diverse themselves, the impact of you taking this action on them? How much of that can you play in the conversation with staff, and how much you just feel you're going to have to take that responsibility as the leaders of the organisation yourselves? A difficult conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is I completely agree with Margot in terms of the balance on internal and external. I think there are some crises that are kind of that definitely start internally, whether they are, McDonald's, CBI having sexual harassment issues over the last year, for example, and or whatever. And there are some where it's because of an internal factor that grows and spreads, and then there are other crises that seemingly come from outside, but really, are important to your staff. So Black Lives Matter being a really crucial one that many organisations, ourselves included, probably didn't react quickly enough to as well. And I think listening to your staff, listening to what are the ones that are really important to them is crucially important, because actually there are so many, you open the paper today and, there are so many issues going on in the world, and anybody, not all corporates can have a voice on every single issue that's out there. But what you need to know is you need to know what are the most important to your staff. And one of the things that we're, very grateful for, and I speak a fair bit to, is our ERGs, sorry, Ian, employee resource groups internally in Royal Mail, to make sure that the voices of, people from parents and carers, women, people from ethnic minorities, people with LGBTQ plus backgrounds as well, that everybody's voice is heard. And so often there's such a good sounding board first off to go, how big is an issue? How should we deal with this? Because they're living that every day in a way that I can't understand. So certainly in the way that I would think about it, I would put internal first, and that would help me think about, which issues we have more of a voice on, which we don't. What's the balance of listening and speaking really on that front. I also think that for different brands will have different, cultures, different customers, and so on. And so sometimes it's about, listening to your customers. If you are, I won't, name any of the names, but there are some companies where they are very, very clear that they are focusing on, 18 to 21-year-olds that have an interest in these sorts of issues, and they are our target market. And therefore understanding what is really important to them from an ethical point of view, from an outlook point of view, and making sure that you're kind of responding to the issues that are important to them is probably quite an important part of your brand, your future business, etc. There are other organisations like Royal Mail, for example. All of the 70 million people in the UK are customers of Royal Mail in some way or shape or form. We'll have delivered a letter or a parcel to you, chances are, unless you are literally completely off grid in the last year or so. So we would probably take a more conservative view on a lot of different things, conservative small c, around, we're not going to be jumping in on every single issue out there. We will be listening to what are most important to our staff. And your point, specifically, Simon, around, did we bring in the voice of the customer when we were talking to our staff around the impact of strike? Absolutely, because I believe that you have to have, honest and truthful, conversations with your colleagues as well about, unfortunately this strike action is meaning customers are turning away as well. And you have to have that sort of conversation internally, I think, to get to the resolution at the end.
Ian, can I pick up on one of the points Jenny was making up there about picking the issues externally that are right for your brand, but for your staff and for your customers, where you will speak. I know that we had quite a few of our clients ask us about what they would do on their channels for Holocaust Memorial Day. Be that quite a regular issue for some companies, where they always are talking about. They have a kind of an annual moment, and do they vary it? Do they not vary it? What about the conflict between internal staff and what they view as the important issues? And it might be the football match on a Saturday, as Jenny highlights, or it might be a change in the rules around the primary school aftercare clubs. Those might not be issues you want to enter into as a company. How do you choose? How do you choose between the array of issues where you can talk about stuff and when to stay silent and when to step forward?
I think, like most of us, we all have so many stakeholders, whether it be our colleagues, whether it be shareholders, whether it be the bank, whether it be customers. There are so many different stakeholders. And if you're not careful, you can become paralysed and actually feel that you don't feel you can comment on anything because you can't please all the people all the time. But I think one of the most important things for me in diversity and inclusion, and is actually not to be frightened to talk about any issue, even if your opinion might not be the opinion of the masses. It's not to be frightened to talk about it, and to make sure that you try and do the right thing. I think so much of decency that's not talked about in society anymore, and being a decent human being. I mean, the world would be a better place if we just cared more. Does that make sense? And I think if you care more and you focus your life on decency, then diversity inclusion becomes part of what we do every day. It should almost become part of our society. So I don't think you should be frightened to talk about any topic unless you truly are ill-informed, and then that's your job to go and become informed. Does that make sense?
Yes. Margot, picking up from where Ian left off, have you seen any bad examples of ill-informed companies that decide to step forward on an issue, or have you worked anywhere where you've averted ill-informed tone and messaging? How do you get tone right, particularly on diversity and inclusion issues?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I don't want to call out companies, but
yeah, I was going to say, maybe that was a bit of a mean question.
But I seen it? Absolutely. And I mean, I think Ian's reflection on decency is a really great one. I'm amazed every day, whether it's media, whether it's, visual or something I read in the papers or whatever it is, that people still make the same mistakes. And I think a lot of people going on giving feedback, maybe even around, I was reading something the weekend about somebody's view on shareholder return, and, again, very badly informed as to how they respond to something, and not understanding who their audience is and who their customers are. And, that's such a short-term perspective. So I see it all the time, and I don't think it's getting better. I think there are some organizations that are brilliant at it, but there are some that are not. And of course, you have the danger always when you let somebody in an organization, when they get let loose and they speak without thinking, they can make some very fatal mistakes. And we still see that happening. And then maybe my last sort of thought is when somebody takes the time to be well informed, I think that's the difference. When somebody takes time to learn, and I think it's been reflected by the others earlier. So I take an example that in our own organization, certainly around things like our LGBTQI work and situations at the moment, discussions around trans exclusion, etc., really got leaders who take time and trouble to ring, to talk, to say, what's the approach? Where are we on that? What do I need to know? Have I not considered this? And they ask thoughtful and provoking questions. And also be big enough to admit that, they don't know everything. We don't all know everything. And if there's a specialist group we can have that conversation with, let's do that. It kind of comes back, and I bring it back to decency. Ian, it's back to what you talked about. It's being decent enough to admit we don't know it all. Sorry, I'm very passionate about that, Simon, but I see it every day, people who just don't think about what they're doing.
Please never apologize for passion. Showing a bit of passion without blending into anger, always a winner in comms, I find. Jenny, can I ask maybe it's a pessimistic question. Ian's talked about decency in stepping forward. You've all talked about listening and making sure you're on firm ground. You understand what you're talking about before you step out and talk. Some of this can lead to a kind of, actually, isn't it easier just to stay quiet? Why do I have to join in these issues? The comms strategy, probably I see the most, and sometimes agree with, is we're not going to do anything. Do you think there's a place for that? And do you also think there are dangers with that?
I think it comes back to a point that Ian made very well, which is that there are always a broad range of stakeholders, and depending on which organisation you are, you might have unions, government, parliamentarians, staff, customers, lots of different things to to factor in. And as I sort of said earlier, you don't necessarily need to be commenting on every single issue that's out there in the media. I think the most important thing, I'm sorry to say, it's coming back to the same theme, which is listen to your staff, listen to the employees, listen to the ones that mean the most to them, and that's where I think you can also have the biggest impact as well. So, is there a place for staying silent on lots of issues? What there isn't a place for is shutting down conversation, I think. And as I say, it doesn't mean that centrally you always need to be putting out your position on lots of different topics, but certainly what you should be doing is making sure that you are, particularly when they are big topical issues that people are feeling very passionate about, create the space for people to have those conversations. Make sure that you have opportunities for people to talk to management about how they feel, and I'd say that's the way to really deal with the problem.
Yeah, look, one tiny little wade in, a cheeky chairman's prerogative. I always feel if you're not going to say anything, make it an active choice. Don't do it out of default. Choose to not say anything, and choose to have a reason to say to your staff, this is the reason why we're not entering into this debate at this time. It's not core to our values. It's not right. I think Jenny and Margot have hinted at something, which is, if you've listened to your staff and you've heard from them that this really matters to them, sometimes it's really hard not to stay silent. Ian, what's the tipping point for you on? I think I've got to step forward and speak on this, because it can be really dangerous. I'm going to use a very big example to step away. So Margot mentioned Roe v. Wade. There was a moment where Disney was battling with its host, the governor, Ron DeSantis in Florida. That's quite a brave thing. I mean, if you're Disney, you can be thought to be quite brave. But even so, that's quite a brave thing to do. But clearly it meant something to their staff. How do you make that judgment about, this is an issue that really matters for the staff? We're going to be brave here, even though it might alienate government, one of our big stakeholders.
I think the important thing is if you've listened and you found a topic that's really important to your colleagues, and we have a few thousand, so it's quite a big audience. And part of the reason I don't like the acronyms things is quite a few of my staff, English is not their first language. So trying to teach them the words is a challenge, and then trying to teach them the three-letter things is even a bigger one. But for me, if you've listened and you feel, if you listen, then it's incumbent on you to actually not be frightened to go out there. But so many people are frightened because of what might come back, what might happen to them personally. And I think, we all have to be that little bit braver to not be frightened to voice an opinion on something that's happening in the world, or something that's happened to a part of society, or something that's happening in your own company. I think bravery, and I go back to decency, can be very closely linked, but it's not easy. And I think we are sat amongst a huge amount of the population who don't feel comfortable to voice an opinion. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have, is to make everybody feel that they can have an opinion without being victimized or really, that's the biggest challenge we have, is to make sure people can have a voice.
Margot, Ian makes an exceptionally good point, doesn't he? You want to make sure that your staff feel they can speak up and you are not closing them down. Shutting down the conversation, as Jenny said, is kind of the fail. But some issues are so polarizing, or have been made so, or portrayed so in the press. You actually mentioned the trans exclusionary issue. It is a bête noire of certain newspapers who will wade in. How do you make space for staff to have for the people who work with you to have differing views on an issue like that, which can be so incredibly personal for people?
Sure, Simon. And I think it's a great question in the sense of, we need to find ways to have lending space around this. So my perspective and view is that even if the organization may not want to publicly comment, or maybe they do, but you've got to start that internal discussion, and you've got to, and taking again something that's out there a lot, people talk about psychological safety, but really it's about feeling that you can say something and not have something come against you, and creating that kind of a space for the conversation where so whether it's an online or everyone comes into a meeting room of the organization and you trash it out and you have that conversation, you hear and you listen to people. And you have to sometimes, and I'm sure we've all had this, where in an organization, a leader, maybe it's the CEO, maybe it's a line leader, whatever, says, okay, we've had the conversation, but the decision is still this. But at least you can feel you've been listened to. And we've certainly had that happen. But I know that I or others have got away and said, well, at least, I was in the room, I was part of the discussion. I may not agree with it, but I heard that, and I heard some of the reasons why. And I think that's the essential piece. And then maybe my last point, and that would be to return to people and say, okay, we did this for this reason. As you know, some agreed, some disagreed. It was very difficult to acknowledge that. And here's what we're going to do now. So if you go out and you say, well, for instance, we're not going to publicly comment around trans exclusion, but we're going to put more funds into work we do to support minorities in our organization around this, then you've got to do it. So you got to live up to the expectation you might have created as well, because that's the worst if you don't.
Margot, thank you. Jenny, a lot of our discussion has been about why the culture matters and valuing the people we work with and work across our organizations. Is there a provable, measurable, financial bottom line improvement in investing in diversity and inclusion? Or is it just something we should do because it's right for the people that work for us?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it is something that we should do, but I think there are, because it's the right thing to do. But I think almost flipping the question on its head, if you don't do it, what's the potential impact? And as I say, kind of throw lots of different companies out there, but the CBI, for example, has been a very high profile example of how, because of a perceived view that they were not tackling the issues of sexual harassment quickly enough and strongly enough, it was a very quick domino effect where suddenly large numbers of their big corporate customers had moved away, the government had moved away from them, and then suddenly your business model doesn't work anymore. And so I think there it's a real example of, how important kind of diversity, reputation, managing those sorts of kind of crises really can be on your financial bottom line, because the whole point of so many crises is they happen quick as well, and you can't kind of re-engineer stuff that you wanted to do beforehand. So I think I'd look at it from that point. What's the financial impact if you don't do it?
Ian, Jenny makes a really good point that crises can happen incredibly fast. If you've not invested up front in knowing what you'll do and how you're including people, you're going to have to do it speedily in the crisis. Is there any tips you can give to people about how the crisis has hit? How do you make sure you keep the lens of diversity and inclusion?
Well, there's two types of crisis. There's one that's out of your control, that's a global. I mean, COVID is a wonderful thing. We'll never know really where that came from, but it was out of all of our control daily. You can't really plan for it apart from having emergency processes in place to to get plans going quickly. But so many crises, and the nature of crisis, the word, it means it comes quickly, it comes unexpected. A lot of it is by having the right policies on inclusion, diversity, all the things that are culturally right for a business, for a country, for a culture. If you can debate all those and plan and listen and have views on it that you believe are defensible or the right thing to do, going back to, I said earlier, decency, if you can have those, then when these crises come, A, they might not come as often, and B, when they do come, you might have a plan, you might have an idea of what that might look like for you and the people that work with you. And for me, I've got 3 generations work in our facilities, and some of them are 2 generations from different countries, and they still don't speak English. So the reality is, diversity means different things to different people. And in my past, I remember sitting in a crisis management meeting where I was the only person speaking English, and the communications issues were huge. But we had to thrash it out in a way we could all understand what was important to each individual culture, person, wherever they're from in the world. And that takes a lot of doing when you don't all speak the same language sometimes. So for me, you'll have less crisis if you actually plan. And I think Jenny and Margot said it brilliantly. You don't have a choice. If you don't do, then more crises are going to come your way, and you won't have a plan, opinion, and that is not a good long-term solution for any business, whatever industry you're in.
Jenny, Margot, Ian, we're coming to the end of our time. I wonder if I can have a kind of final thought from all 3 of you. We've discussed the importance of diversity and inclusion, and that planning not happening in the crisis moments, but happening ahead of the crisis moment. If you were giving people a couple of tips, a couple of things to think about, to take away, that from this discussion here, they should go and check that they've got the right processes, the right thinking, just from your perspective, even if it's something you've got right in the past always, or something that's caught you out in the past. Can you give us a thought? Jenny, do you want to go first? Jenny, then Margot, then Ian.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, it's inevitable. We have spent a huge amount of time actually talking about culture, and that is important, and creating the right kind of listening and debate spaces as well. It's amazing when you're thinking about crisis communications. I think so many people think of it as, what's hitting the headlines? Have you got the Prime Minister criticising you? Have you got, when actually so many crises, as I kind of started by saying, they actually can be either avoided or dealt with so much more quickly by making sure that you factored in diversity and inclusion right from the start. So if I was going to give a tip to anybody, I would, as part of your kind of crisis resilience planning, when you're looking at all of the kind of major risks that are coming down the track that you may need to be dealing with as an organisation, I would actually think, do you have the spaces, the forums, the employee resource groups, whatever it is internally, to very quickly mobilise the views of people so that you can take the right decision for your business or organisation? And also, don't leave it until the point that the crisis happens. Why aren't you mobilising them and speaking to them now?
Very good point, Margot.
Yeah, I think agree with everything Jenny's just said, and probably add to it. I think it's really great if you can remind people, what are the values of the organization? I always use that as a starting point. So if I'm going to put a mirror up in front of myself and we're in that situation, we'll say, well, we're about A, B, C, or D. Is this reflected? Is that something we're doing? What are all these things, the tropes we put out? Are we really living to them? And use that to challenge ourselves back. And secondly, I think it's really a good tip I would do, and we're not there yet, but I'm in the process of doing, is an advocacy policy within our organization, and actually some processes around that. So it's actually thinking about, what are we going to respond to generally? What are the kind of things we will allude to? How will we do this? Because as we all know, when it actually happens, sometimes we don't have the time to go back and to look at that. So it's good to have something you can refer to. And that's just two, and happy to come back, but push onto Ian if you want to.
Ian.
I don't think I can add that much to that. I think that's absolutely brilliant responses. The one thing that I'm going to say, which is over and above what's already been said, because I love the look in the mirror. I love that we have to do this stuff. But for me, the one bit of advice I could give to anybody is on this whole topic, there is no shortcut. There is no quick fix. There's no shortcut. It's about creating a culture that everybody feels included and open. And in my experience, if the world was at peace, maybe we'd be closer to it, but it's not. Therefore, there are no shortcuts to creating the right culture, the right diversity, the right inclusion. That's my only real, I think I can add.
Margot, Jenny, Ian, thank you very much. We've hit the buffers and the end point. One reflection, particularly picking up on Margot's point, sometimes worth asking the question, is this a crisis? Is this really a crisis for my organization? And what kind of crisis is it? If these are my values and I'm sticking to them and I'm being decent and my staff are behind me, is this really a crisis, or is this just a difficult day that we need to see through because we're actually being, I've heard the word brave in stepping forward and saying what matters for our organization. And what matters for our organization, I think you've heard from Margaret, from Jenny, from Ian, is the balance is our people, the people who work for it. Of course, you're taking into account our stakeholders and everyone externally. But what do our people think? Because they're the ones who are going to step forward and represent you and do the communicating. And then last is listening. Bless you for listening throughout this period. But a lot of the communications is about listening and hearing hard what people are actually saying to you and responding to that, whether there's your staff or people externally. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Margot, Jenny and Ian. We are now checking out because we're going to an advert break, but stay with Dial Global because coming up, panel 3, ethnicity reporting, setting effective targets and practices. Layla will chair it. We have a colleague from Royal Mail, Fiona Barron, who will be on that panel, Bob Athwal from Skyscanner, and from LexisNexis, Donica Black. So do join for that after this short break so that you can do a bit of listening to somebody else rather than us for a while. Thank you.